Hi there, Paul Rossi here, founder and COO of 910 Drones. Thank you for joining me and our panelists today for the Drones and Disaster Response webinar, which is part 3 in our decision-making drone use webinar series hosted by FoxFury Lighting Solutions, FLIR Systems, Insight Fire Training, and 910 Drones. We have great panelists and we have great topics that we are going to discuss. Joining us today is Darshan Devakaran, President of Aerovat Solutions and the founding president of the AUVSI North Carolina chapter. Also joining us is Brandon Carr, Sergeant with the Pearland Police Department and president of the Public Safety Unmanned Response Team. Brandon is the UAS program coordinator with Pearland Police Department as well. Joining us is Brandon Fitzhugh with the Lieutenant Brandon Fitzhugh with the Spring Lake Fire Department. He is the UAS program coordinator for Spring Lake. Lastly, joining us is Sergeant Chris Cody, the UAS program coordinator with the Fayetteville Police Department. All of our panelists have experience operating and leveraging drones within disaster response. And the topics that we're going to cover include how states can leverage drones, how regional public safety unmanned response teams can support response efforts across large areas within states and even bigger regions. And lastly, we're going to discuss the importance of cities, towns, and municipalities having their own UAS programs embedded within their police and fire departments. So without further ado, we're going to cut over to Darshan, and we're going to have him start out our discussion, discussing how North Carolina, the state DOT, leveraged drones during Hurricane Florence in 2018. Darshan?
Discussion. So states are using drones. That's not a new news for everyone. But there are still states that are way behind and have to catch up with states like North Carolina, Ohio, Utah, that have been using this technology not just for specific uses, but multiple uses. So when it comes to disaster response, from a state perspective, you already have your public safety agencies that respond to emergencies, disasters. You have emergency management. You have Department of Transportation that manages the infrastructure for the state. So you have all these agencies within the state that are responding to disasters over many years now. And it's not just drones are a new technology, a new tool in their belt that they are using, but they have been doing traditional response with aerial-based solutions like manned aircrafts, helicopters. They have been doing ground-based systems and everything. So hurricane response or disaster response, any of these response or emergency response, man-made or natural, are all part and parcel of traditional response operations. But with new technologies being added to it, emerging technologies, we are seeing a drastic change in the way the response is done and how quick the response is done. So this is just a survey done in 2018 by American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, showing how many DOTs are currently using drones in some capability, maybe in research capability to day-to-day operations. And you can see out of 44 responding, 35. So states are, this in 2018, 2 years now, a lot has changed. So you are going to be seeing more states using it. But one of the discussions that we're going to be having today is focused, for me, it's focused on North Carolina. So when you talk about North Carolina, the NCDOT manages all the infrastructure for the state. So that's 80,000 road miles. And then 72 publicly owned airports, 13,500 bridges, and 3,300 miles of railroad track. So all this after disaster has to be monitored, inspected to make sure that people can resume their day-to-day operations safely. And sometimes it's not easy to go to certain locations because of flooding and everything. And traditionally, some of the response has taken over weeks to months, and because of no available data or no current data. So this is just a little bit of understanding of for a state like North Carolina. Also, in North Carolina, we are one of the unique states here that additional to FAA Part 107, you need a North Carolina permit, which is issued by the NCDOT, by the Division of Aviation. This is a free permit, and it's required for all commercial and government operations. So no matter you're doing routine operations or disaster response, you need to have your FAA Part 107 and your North Carolina permit for operations. Now, getting into the drones in Hurricane Florence case study, I led the flight operations and safety for the state for the last 2 years for NCDOT as a program engineer, and led the hurricane response and airspace deconfliction side for the state. So just on the Hurricane Florence, if you take the case study, we had 15 teams, both public and private sector. We did about 260 flight missions, over 8,000 images and videos, a lot of live streaming. And the platforms we used at that time were DJI and SenseFly EB. Because these platforms were easily replaceable, we didn't have to stop our operations, because if one goes down, we could easily buy another one. So it's one of the important things for us was technology that was easy to replace, easy to use, and get the work done as quick as possible. In addition to that, we were able to test the first nationally a statewide UTM dashboard that we had under the integration pilot program, where we could see the manned aircrafts flying and the unmanned aircrafts, that is our pilots, where they were flying, and what altitude they were, and the pilot information and everything. So in case there's a manned response, or if there is some emergency, we can ask the aircraft to come down by a click of a button and sending them a text message. So we were able to use this during Florence. We were able to bring all the data, that's pictures and videos, into a GIS map, and this solves the problem of data management in a big way. So we were able to share this to all the agencies within the state, and in real time, as soon as the person uploads the data, I would say real time is in about 15-20 minutes, this data would get uploaded to the GIS map, and they could, depending on if it's pictures, video would take a little more time, but we didn't have to send gigabytes and terabytes of data via emails, or ask someone to drop this data via USB. All we had to do was share a link, and they were able to access the images and videos. As we move into this session, there will be more information, but I'll leave, before I go to the next presenter, I'll just leave it with a video, and let me know if everyone can hear it.
Yep.
One of the big problems with hurricanes in North Carolina is the amount of flooding.
It's not
damage that comes along with.
I understood what the problem is, and
got a reboot.
and right there, share.
Looks good.
One of the big problems with hurricanes in North Carolina is the amount of flooding that we get and all the damage that comes along with that.
We got a hurricane coming. We got drones. How can we help?
We decided that the first thing to do after a hurricane passes is to start getting our drone teams deployed. We want people to get back on the roads. We want our transportation system to be running smoothly.
There was a massive effort. 15 teams were deployed all over North Carolina during and after the hurricane. They set up a command center within Division Aviation. It was a 7 to 10 day process.
On Monday, when the skies finally cleared, we were hitting the ground running. And that week, we flew over 250 missions with drones.
We were able to direct aid into certain areas that needed them rapidly. We're also able to present live video back to the command center. State leaders were able to make calls and look at different areas of flooding.
I-40, a major corridor in our state, 3 miles of it was underwater.
We had power outages. Some part of our cities were disconnected because the interstate was shut because of the flooding.
We would share that live feed with basically the decision makers in downtown Raleigh, and then eventually had to shut the road down. But we were able to plan ahead to say, okay, we need to find another artery through Lenore County because the water's coming.
Our general public, through news and media, were able to see all the coverage that the drones were providing during the hurricane relief. They were able to provide real-time feed on the state of their property, their belongings instantly, versus we've got to wait a few days or hopefully somebody will fly over and capture a glimpse of where we live. And they were able to direct teams into certain areas, and we were able to gather that data and provide it instantly.
The perception of the use of drones has changed dramatically because we're able to use it as a tool and really educate the public. We're also able to use it as a tool to help rescue folks that were stranded, and we're able to use it to help assess our transportation corridors and infrastructure, and ultimately allow folks to get back into those affected communities.
We are witnessing a rebirth of aviation through unmanned aviation.
I think that it really opened the door for a positive spotlight for the state.
So this was the 20s. This was created last year. The DJI team came in to help put this out and spread the message that state agencies like Department of Transportations are also working towards disaster response, and every DOT out there, can do the same. So yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Darshan. I mean, if that video there, and I don't know, I'm hearing. All right, if that video doesn't get you excited about disaster response, it's kind of weird, right? But we touched on it earlier, the mapping, video, photo, and you were talking about bringing that stuff into the GIS and making it accessible. So figuring out, what are we using, video or photo? Are we creating maps, models? How are we getting this out? Those are all the questions that you're asking beforehand. I know we got folks tuning in that are in positions within state, and not just in the state of North Carolina, but across the country. And they're trying to figure out, how do I integrate this as a tool into what you're already doing? It's a tool that's going to assist in what's already happening. And we're going to go to Brandon Carr, who's operating out of Texas, and find out, exactly a little bit more in detail what public safety, and to speak about what you're saying, Darshan, with the roadways and DOT, it's all in support of the public and allowing public safety folks to continue to do what they need to do, access to roadways, bridges, and things like that. And I think Brandon Carr, I'm going to stop talking and just, let you go ahead and roll out here. Tell us a little bit about what you've done in regards to disaster response.
All right, so thank you everybody for attending. So we have responded both as Pearland Police Department and for the Gulf Coast Public Safety Unmanned Response Team. We have responded to several different disasters, whether it was a flooding event or a tornadic event, which we'll talk about the tornadic side of things here in a little bit. I just sent out a link in the chat. If everybody would click on that, you'll actually be able to see it on your own computer. That way I don't have to worry about latency issues on the big maps and whatnot. But the way that we respond to disasters is just depending on what our objective is, what our tasking is. Is it damage assessment? Is it search and rescue, search and recover? We will either live stream all of our videos in through DroneSense, or we will go and map the damaged area and provide all that data to the decision makers through ArcGIS, which is a program, which is what y'all are going to be seeing here, the online version of that. So depending on what our objective is and what our tasking is, what intel the decision makers need is how we will deploy our assets accordingly. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share here. All right, so is everybody able to see the Polk County, Texas tornado home screen? Hopefully, okay.
We are seeing it.
Good deal. So we're all on the same screen here. So we were initially requested out through Polk County Officer of Emergency Management as a mutual aid request for the regional team to come out and assist with search and rescue initially. So we sent some team members up that were close to that area that had that capability to go and do an immediate response. Following that, we were requested to do damage assessment mapping for where the tornado actually came through. And so the teams that participated in that were the Pearland Police Department, the Center for Robotics Assisted Search and Rescue, or CRASAR, our Moreau Villages Police Department, Splendora Police Department, Missouri City, Bel Air Police Department, and Houston Fire Department, as well as USAA. The tornado came through on April 22nd. It was an F3 tornado. The primary impacted area of the 30-mile track was on Alaska, and so that is where we were tasked. We ended up going up there, and they requested that we map all 9 subdivisions that were affected by the tornado. That ended up coming out to right at 1,400 acres. We had a total mission time of 8 hours, 30 minutes, total 27 flights. We took 3,863 images, which totaled out to 36 gigs. So that's a whole lot of data. One of the issues that we came across is the same thing that happens in every disaster that I've responded to is we lost comms. We did not have data up there. We could call each other, but we couldn't actually get any kind of data to push up or down over a network. And we had cows out there, or cellular on wheels, to help with that, but it still was completely overloaded because by the time the data got pushed out, now everybody's trying to get on that frequency. Even with FirstNet, it just was not functional, unfortunately. So the way that we had to do that was we went and mapped our subdivision. We sent out all the teams to go do their areas, and then they had to come back to a data manager. We had to get that data, take it to the EOC, and offload it to be uploaded up onto ArcGIS. So, which is fairly common. Unfortunately, we haven't quite figured out an easy way for data to be transported whenever it goes down. So we had 8 teams. The platforms that we used were the DJI Phantom 2 Pro, the Mavic 2 Pro, two M210s, and a Trinity F9, and a Paradenopi. We processed all the data in Pix4D Mapper initially, and we tried React.
Brandon?
Yes.
Could you touch on why you use multiple platforms, and then there was no issues with the fact that these pictures were collected from different drones?
So Pix4D will crunch anything almost. There's very few cameras that it won't crunch. We did have one individual that came out with a different team that tried to map with a M210 with a Z30, but Pix won't map a Z30. But Pix4D will crunch any of these, and it did an exceptional job for it. The reason that we use so many different platforms is not everybody has the budget to just go throw an M210 up. Not everybody has the budget to pay for a Mavic, a Phantom. So our teams bring what they have, and if it's something that we can process, then they will use it. So we know what teams have what products, or what assets, I should say, so that I know that they'll work with what I'm trying to do, what our tasking is. And so that's why we have so many different ones.
And from like a public safety folks that are tuning in, police, law enforcement, SAR, having a Phantom 4 Pro, having a Mavic 2 Pro, that 20 megapixel sensor, 1 inch, I mean, that has a lot of value for these types of operations. Is that correct? Even though it's not like, clearly it's not the most expensive drone out there. It's the opposite, and it still adds great value, I think.
Right. Yeah. So like my team was running the M210 with an X4S, but like I said, not everybody has the funding to go buy the latest and greatest, biggest, awesomest drone.
Right. But you can
so
you can still get stuff done.
Right. Yeah. So, oh yeah, you can definitely do it. I mean, so one of the other hats I wear is I go all over the country teaching accident reconstruction and crime scene reconstruction utilizing drones. We teach it with a Mavic 2 Pro. You can do it. It has the capabilities.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. I just wanted to have you touch on that a little bit because a lot of the folks that tune in, they may or may not have a program, or they have these types of drones, which would be viewed as like a limited type of platform. But in this area, North Carolina, Texas, there's value in that. So yeah,
definitely.
You can go right ahead. You were talking about
you're good.
sortie.
So we would take all that data, we would process it all locally in the field, and then we would take those final products to your orthomosaics, and we would give those to our data managers and data processors for the incident, and they dump that into GIS. So we did a couple of testing just to see how it would work. We used Drone to Map, which we had out on site. We had Site Scan, Pix4D React, and Mapper. What we found was running Mapper on rapid low res, we were able to get the products fast. And so it wasn't quite as fast as React, but we noticed there were some cameras that React wouldn't process, but Mapper would. One of those was a Mavic 2 Zoom. So what we ended up doing was rapid low res ortho, take that, dump it out, and then over time, once we went back out and we had the drone flying, then we would try to process a high res so we could also give them that. But we gave them the low res so that they had intel immediately that they could start making decisions on. This story map is what we also used to update information as we had data, depending on where we were in the area. So some of this is our stuff, some of it is not. This was ABC 13's video of it. We added that just for informational purposes, situational awareness. Same with the Houston Weather Channel's video of the tornado. So this was the actual data set that our EOC was using. So the purple line that comes clear across that 30-mile line here, that's the track of the actual tornado. We pulled that data layer from NOAA so that we had the track and we knew roughly where it was and how bad that tornado was at that time. Like I said, we were tasked with on Alaska. The difference in coloration that you'll see here versus up here versus down here is up here is a base layer from our GIS where it's satellite imagery, everyday stuff. And then you have this different coloration. That is the maps that we flew and processed in the field and then uploaded to cover it. We also were able to pull their parcel data. So as we mapped it, we could say, hey, this address, you can see the house is up, the house is down. They need assistance, they don't need assistance. In the end, they had a total of 320 structures damaged, had no damage. 492 were damaged, 27 were failed, 107 are completely destroyed, and we had victims of numbered of 324 individuals. The color coding was reports of damage and the severity of that damage. And so you'll notice down here, they had a couple of reports, but they wanted us to map the whole subdivision, and a lot of the subdivision was fine. So that also told them, all right, we're getting reports of damage, but there's really nothing there. So they knew that, all right, I need to allocate my resources here, not here. And so that was something that they could actually take and utilize that information. So this was the overall damage assessment. We also broke that down into each individual subdivision if you wanted to look specifically at Paradise Acres, that's this subdivision. If you wanted to look specifically at Paradise Acres, you could go to that map. But essentially what we ended up doing is we took the orthomosaics and then, sorry, bear with me, my internet's giving me a hard time. We took those orthomosaics, and you can take that and zoom in on it because it is a high-res image or high-res orthomosaic and see exactly what the damage looks like. We could come in and say, okay, yeah, that house is okay. It took a little bit of damage in this structure, but that doesn't look like it's the main living section. However, this house, on the other hand, got completely decimated. And so that's something that's intel that they can actually use. They can say, okay, these people need some help. Let's send some resources there. While our drones are mapping, they do have the capability to live stream into the EOC, so they can see as my drone is flying, taking its photos, they got actionable intel, live streaming capabilities of what is going on.
Brandon,
As long as we had cellular.
So Brandon, we got a question that came in from, I believe it's Sasa. I apologize if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. I apologize. They were asking it, and it's great that you were just mentioning being able to have that live stream. At what altitude were you flying? Sasha, okay. What altitude were you flying these maps? And that kind of goes along to the fact that you're at an altitude where you can actually see and do some type of, and not, I don't want to say inspecting, but you're doing some visual observation while it's happening.
Right. So we flew this at varying altitudes. It depended on the platform. So, for example, I can see more in a 21 megapixel camera than I can in a 12 megapixel camera. So it depends on your capabilities. The majority of these flights were flown at 400 feet with a 65-70 overlap, front and side overlaps. So that is how we did our maps.
And 400 feet would be to limit is that to limit the sizes, because that works for the application, right? You're doing that damage assessment.
We're not looking for gouges in the road. We're not looking for shell casings on the ground. We're seeing if a house is up or down. So you don't need to have a ground sampling distance of 0.2. You can do it much greater at a much higher altitude. That narrows down your data sets too, so that you don't have a crap ton of data. So if we were to fly at a lower altitude, we potentially could have quadrupled our photos, which is just, we were already dealing with 36 gigabytes of data. That's a lot to push. And so flying high, because we're seeing if a house is up, we don't need super fine detail by flying at a lower altitude. So again, going into what you're wanting to do and what your tasking is will dictate how you're going to fly.
Awesome. Yeah, that was a good answer. Let me see. I have a question that just popped up. How far are we? So we have a question in regards to from Trung. How far are we in terms of assessing / quantifying property damages?
So we're looking at.
Do we have any data available?
So I know that there are some types of AI that you can integrate into your mapping softwares. I don't know how developed and how accurate those are, but I do know that they exist. I personally have not tested them, so I can't answer your question that well. The way that they were doing it was they would take my image and they would say, is the structure up? Is the structure down? Is the structure gone? And they would say, that is my damage assessment. If they wanted to go in and do a more in-depth damage assessment on where is the damage on that specific structure, then we could do a different type of tasking and a different mission for that. And our data would be different.
And then maybe as more mapping happens and we unfortunately go through more of these things, we can kind of determine whether it's through AI, maybe in other technological developments, like how to quantify that.
Right.
So no other, well, I was gonna say you can go on. All right, right. So no such data yet. That is correct. We got that answered. No other questions have come up. So if you just want to carry on. And
yeah, so this was one of our easier or best use cases anyway, as far as how well we were able to immediately do rapid response, rapid processing in the field, process everything locally since we couldn't push anything over the internet, and take that back to the EOC and they could utilize it. This was, they were not initially educated on what all the capabilities of a drone are. And that is something that I've come across all over the nation is most people will get, they'll say, all right, hey, I have a drone on my incident, but they have no idea what all the capabilities are. And that is what your job is as a UAS pilot now in public safety, is to go to these agencies, go to your offices of emergency management and explain to them, hey, this isn't just a toy that I bought at Best Buy that I could go get an aerial view real quick. This can provide people with actual actionable intel that can be used across multiple different platforms that are currently being used that aren't specific to drones.
And touch on that, like in response, because you mentioned when you come out here, you're asked for the very limited items. And I think we're in that point of education where folks need to understand what values having that UAS tool respond attached to your incident can bring. And that's why it's great having folks on today that might not be pilots themselves, but are somehow associated with emergency services, emergency response. This information, just this report, again, folks, shared in the chat is the link to this report. And you can even drop I'm sure Brandon, again, before you leave, you can drop that link so that folks that aren't just pilots, but folks that are in these decision-making positions can flip through here. And then when an incident happens and a drone team responds, they know what information is going to be asked of, or what they can ask for and what they can expect from the team. So a little, can you touch on, are you finished up here, or were you wrapping up in regards to the?
Yeah, as far as how we did it and what we did, yes. We were able to, like I said, dump in the orthos for all the subdivisions. Our maps actually adjusted the path that NOAA believed the tornado to go based off of how accurate our maps were. So that just makes everything else more accurate on the back end for everybody. So it's definitely a great tool. It's something that I think needs to be integrated in for every disaster, because it's much cheaper than buying a helicopter. Any agency can go buy a drone for the most part and be able to use it. It just takes training and practice and understand how it can be applied to be best suited for your event.
And we have a question here in regards to from Tiziano. I'm not going to try the last name, but I believe it's Tiziano. And they asked, do you have any specific training and dedicated officers for data link management and interpretation?
So for Pearland, yes. I also go all over the nation teaching this. All over, when I say nation, I mean U.S. Whether it's through Texas A&M TEACS, or whether it's through Forensic Mapping Solutions, we do teach this, and it's offered through a couple of other agencies as well, that you can learn how to do data management, how to do damage assessment and whatnot. There are trainings all over the place for that. But specific to public safety UAS response, yes, there is training out there. All of our guys are trained up on disaster response, because there is a component that you can use mapping for search and rescue to map an entire search area and then go back and do what's called squinting on all of your images to see if you can find that guy. So there is more to mapping than just disaster. But yes, our guys are trained up on it, and there is specific training that you can go and sign up for.
That's great. Now, being able to respond to this, the reason that unmanned response team exists that allows you to bring teams together is because of what you're doing back at your department. Would you say that? And then just touch a little bit on how you're prepared for that. And then if you're going to respond, because we have folks in public safety that they get a drone and they want to be able to participate in these sorts of operations. So how do you have to be able to support yourself and prepare to respond regionally in a disaster?
So we do, well, before Corona hit, we did bi-monthly training where all of the agencies can come to Pearland and get training for free. We would have guest speakers come in. We would have, I would teach it for free. And it allowed them to get training, how to do things. And it worked out really well. And that way they knew what I needed whenever we got to a scene. I said, hey, you're doing mapping for that subdivision. I didn't have to worry about holding their hand. They now know what we're doing because we've all had joint regional training on what to do for XYZ, whether it's search for a suspect, map a disaster, go fly a fire, whatever it's going to end up being. We train for that with our regional team.
Excellent. And this will kind of transition now over to Brandon Fitzhugh and Chris Cody, both here in the local Cumberland County region of North Carolina. And having that local program, because in this incident with you, and I'm looking at my screen and I'm wondering, am I showing up on everybody's screen? Like, are you seeing me? Okay. I'm getting like a big Brandon car, so I'm not sure if everyone's seeing him and I'm talking. So I was just like, let's check that. But in that incident, when Brandon, the disaster, the tornado didn't occur in your community. So you were responding to it. The importance of having that program, not just to support your other local region, but it's also for your own community as well. And we've got Brandon Fitzhugh, Lieutenant Brandon Fitzhugh and Sergeant Chris Cody with us, who have both operated drones during Hurricane Florence in 2018 in order to support the local communities. So what I want to do is kick it over to Sergeant Cody, and I'm going to bring some video up and we have some photos to support what Sergeant Cody is going to be discussing in regards to flooding with Hurricane Florence.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. As he said, my name is Sergeant Chris Cody. I'm with the Fayetteville Police Department. I'm on the aviation team here and the supervisor and flight instructor. I'm also a certified flight instructor with the FAA and work out of Fayetteville Airport at times. What he's talking about with the Fayetteville Police is that we were tasked to do a bunch of search and rescue operations, as well as monitoring the river for the flooding that had taken place. The video here is at the low level of the river during its normal operations. And you can see that several of these bridges have a lot of tree debris and other things behind it. This is one of our local rivers we run through. We even patrol this on occasions. But when we had the flooding from the hurricane, all this water came down from the other parts of the state and it flooded up to the railroad trestle. In fact, this video shows it was a little bit lower here than the one you'll be seeing here in just a second. The problem with this type of flooding is that it can encroach into different areas on the sides of the roadways of the river. There was residential areas that needed to be evacuated. You can see here, if you want to pause that for just a second, Paul. You can see here that all this tree debris that's around the trestle, and including the water current, it's such an enormous amount of pressure upon that trestle where it's mounted to those bridge pilings. And then we've got all of this debris plus trestles plus everything else that's taken place that was also endangering a public housing area just literally 300 or 400 yards down the road. And we had to monitor that for the river to start cresting, creating the water rushing in, and then we were able to start evacuating people when they needed to. This was being live streamed to our command and control network. We were monitoring this while they were contacting the other EOC supports, and they managed to evacuate the housing areas well in time to do what we had to do. But then in addition to that, we also had to block off the roadway and the railroad track because we had citizens who were trying to cross over the railroad track just to stand in the middle of the river and see the event take place. You can see over here in the distance, oh, Paul just moved it a little bit.
Yep.
see in the distance, this is where we were taking off and landing over there on the roadway for our drone and drone launches and such. So we had a lot of activity taking place. There was a lot of communications going on with the EOC, with the fire department, with the police department, as well as the other agencies outside of that. In addition to this, we wound up going over to Spring Lake and assisting them in search and rescue operations, identifying people out there out in the locations. And then we also had to go out and do a search for the water treatment facility that had been flooded. Now this was for, I don't see the pictures.
The picture, I have this video here.
Okay. That would be the water treatment facility that had gotten flooded. Well, now you can imagine the diesel from the different vehicles that were over there were glistening and moving down, as well as the fecal matter and other unclean debris from this thing actually traveled into an apartment complex that they were able to use these videos to show that the travel path through there. They were able to condemn all that due to the fact it was a biohazard for a lot of that activity that was going on through there. These, imagine hog swamps and ash ponds and everything else that we have now in North Carolina. The use of these drones, the photographs, and the data that we're able to provide people, that's an invaluable source when it comes to search and rescue, damage mitigation. And that one's a good one, Paul. Go back just a little bit on that. See if we get a better angle on that. We're able to see the sheen on the river, on the creek itself when it had flooded. Well, yeah. That's all right. And able to provide that with the insurance companies and everybody else that had to come in there, and as well as FEMA and Red Cross, to know that they have to go ahead and start shuttling these people out and finding places for them to stay.
And then I want to bring in Brandon Fitzhugh, who was out there in Spring Lake. Are you up here, Brent? Are you on?
Yeah, but I'm here.
And if you can kind of speak to, as well as what Sergeant Cody was saying in regards to how this imagery, how this supports not just the department, but local, the town, and all those involved.
Yeah, so Sergeant Cody, I think he arrived whenever I left. I left for about 2 hours, and they came in and done some aerial imagery for us. And this is all before we even had our U.S. program. Currently, the video you're seeing right here, this was almost like direct flight line for Polk Airport. I actually caught a news camera agency flying right here. We had to get them down. But all this over here was, a hotel that got washed away. So this was critical for what he took and the stuff that I took, just to show the EOC, who needs help, who's going to need, assistance, basically from Red Cross.
And you made a good point, Brandon, in regards to the airspace that's involved here when it comes to disaster response. And I think both you and Sergeant Cody could talk to how being in this DoD airspace, and then with the state operations and having helicopters, and how important it is to understand where you're at, having checked all the proper boxes to be doing the appropriate things and not interfering. And this comes back to this apartment complex as well. Brandon, if you want to continue talking about that. And then also, just like you were mentioning, touch on the fact that we have lots going on in the air during these times.
Yeah, so the water treatment plant is up here in the top left-hand corner, and everything as far as fecal matter, oil, et cetera, is coming down, hitting these apartments. You can even see the sheen right here, like Sergeant Cody was talking about, off this one car to the left. And this was a bad situation. So we used to have people in these that wouldn't get out or evacuate. So we had to go back in there and get them. And that was another hazard that we had to face while sending our, our rescuers in. So this is a current picture of the complex. They basically went in there and just gutted everything and just put, new drywall insulation up, and they're back, going. A lot of the problem was it wasn't the hurricane. It was 2 days later when everything crested and it became a problem for the flooding. And that's what we was not prepared for. We got cut off. Our radios were not being useful. So we had a lot of issues that we didn't know that could exist until the disaster happened, that now we are prepared for.
And being prepared for something like this, and I'll go, Brandon, you can touch on it, and then I'll ask Sergeant Cody to talk a little about it. But how is having programs during these types of responses and being able to add value to the local community or the city, the town, and again, the decision makers, how does this help your program move forward?
A lot of it, we didn't have a program at first, so everything I did on my own. At that time, we had been talking about doing a program, and then Sergeant Cody came out, and it really showed us the benefit of it. And then, so having all this data, we basically, when it was time for FEMA to come in and look at everything, we was able to show just visual pictures of how bad it actually was. So the reimbursements were a lot better for the town. And that's what, basically opened up our whole program of saying, hey, this needs to happen. And now our mutual aid departments benefit also since we, have it. So even if we don't have a problem and our department next to it does, we can also assist them and just help with the community in general.
Sergeant Cody?
Hey, the best part about it is cost efficiency. You're talking about the amount of time we put into photographing, videoing, and then using a helicopter to do that would be enormous enormous expenditure. Overhead costs and something like that, and operating expenses about $250,000 a year just for one helicopter. When you're talking about maybe $1,500 a year for a drone, buying some new batteries and such once you've made that initial expenditure. So it's pennies on a dollar for recharging or using a generator to recharge your batteries out there. Not to mention the fact that the systems that we use are pretty self-sustaining. We don't necessarily have to do a lot of work with it. In fact, like Brandon was talking about with mapping, you set it up and it does the job for you, and you're able to do a lot of situational awareness and monitoring. So having all that in place was a great argument to say, look, we need another 2 or 3 of these types of drones, in which we did, and we use them for traffic reconstruction and crime scenes outside. And we use Pix4D with that as well. But we also will go out there for the protests, and we're surveilling the protests and live streaming for that. We now have stationary systems called aerostats, which are blimps that we can put up and monitor there. That's going to be good for the next event that we have, and to be able to put up after the storm goes through and be able to monitor how the river's flowing, what we need to do in certain areas. When there's power that's out, we still have the ability to video and present that through a computer to somebody else. So even a mobile command center can be put together and live stream this so that there's always intelligence coming through. So like Darshan was saying, this is going to become a much greater event going forward with unmanned, because there are so many different things we can use unmanned systems for. And as they improve and their times become longer in battery life, then we can actually see more and more of these being used as opposed to manned aircraft for search and rescue and stuff.
That's awesome. I would say with you saying that, it's reach out, because you mentioned after adding value locally to the community across different types of operations, you were able to get that support to build out a program further. So it's not try to understand every single use case of a drone in public safety, but maybe bringing one in $15,000, $2,000, $2,500. Don't want to get too much into the cost, talk here, the systems themselves are not that expensive. But then when you want to get the appropriate training and things like that, that's where I think a lot of folks have questions. So what I would say with that is to reach out, connect with folks locally. Reach out. We're going to have you guys put your information in from an email if you want to put a phone number, and folks can reach out to you guys, you know, ask questions and get pointed in some direction, and connect with those local folks that can provide support, whether you're in, you know, Texas, California, North Carolina, you know, see what's going on locally. Maybe there's some sort of PCERT like you have, Brandon's a part of. They're always, you know, helping local organizations to get their programs going. And I also want to make a note that Darshan, Brandon, Carr, and then Chris, I believe all three are pilots, correct? And then I don't want to stick you in the corner, Brandon F., but, you know, I too have that manned aircraft certificate. So having that background and understanding that manned aviation is efficient in some use cases, but you're saying from a cost standpoint, this is kind of being able to almost give a helicopter, you know, for pennies on the dollar. So I appreciate that. What I want to do at this time, because we're coming to the end here, I don't see any questions. I see the chat active there. So anyone, any of the panelists that want to drop your information in, feel free to do that. But at this time, I just want to go through and have like final thoughts and close things out. So Darshan, you've had the chance now to kind of listen to what these folks are saying, and what final thoughts you kind of want to give to the audience tuning in?
So I think in final thoughts, I would like to mention two initiatives that are taking place, and people should know about it. One is NASA has put out an initiative called Scalable Traffic Management for Emergency Response Opportunities or Operations. I think it's operations, called Stereo. This is where when emergency response is taking place and everything, you need a traffic management system in place, and NASA is driving that in a big way. So that's going to help, especially with disaster response. And also just about, I think just 15 minutes before this session, FAA also just made an announcement regarding the tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver for first responders. So this will be another important resource for first responders who want to get immediate quick waivers to fly. There are certain criteria. It has to be in the first, and those criteria have to be met. But it's moving. The technology is moving. The opportunities are changing for agencies. The industry used to drive faster. The industry initiatives were faster than the public safety initiatives. But I think FAA and other agencies have realized that it's time to invest a little more, bit more time and energy into into public safety operations. So we're seeing that shift, and I just expect and ask people to read information, get the information from experts rather than going through the mistakes or going through issues and then realizing that you could have avoided that.
Excellent. Thanks, Darshan. And I'm going to go over to Brandon Carr, who has familiar with that. And we mentioned it during our previous webinar, that CPLA waiver for public safety. So go ahead, Brandon, and kind of give us your final thoughts here.
Yeah, so as Darshan said, we do have the tactical digital line of sight waiver. We were the first agency to get one outside of the Chula Vista with the IPP program. I dropped the guide in the chat for anybody who wants it. It's a step-by-step. This is how we got it. It's very police-proof, so I could say that. But it just like you said, you have to do a con-op. You have to a concept of operations. You have to explain how you're going to, just like all the other waivers, violate that regulation safely. So the way that we're doing it is there's a multiple different ways of attacking that. The way that we're doing it is we're bound by 150 feet horizontally, 50 feet above any structure. So inside of that bubble, we can utilize forward observers that are not dedicated visual observers that they may be able to say, hey, I'm dealing with this right here, but I can see your drone. You need to be careful. There's that. And we can utilize that intel. We also use a secondary drone if we have that capability to monitor where that other drone is flying that we can keep in visual line of sight. So there's definitely some.
That's awesome stuff. And we'll probably end up having some type of, hopefully bring you on to discuss that. But final thoughts on disaster response and how, you know, local, state agencies, organizations can take the information from here.
I would definitely just take the information that you learned here, go practice it, and then go and tell other agencies how you could use it for their incident. That's the biggest thing, is teaching everybody, hey, call us, we'll come out there and help you with your incident. But don't go and be a disaster tourist. Don't go out there and self-deploy. So that's one thing I can't stress enough is having to deal with people that are coming out and doing self-deployment is a huge nightmare in the incident command structure.
Right, great. That's really good information. So start with your local, especially if you're in public safety, start with that local program, build it out, understand your capabilities. So then when you're, and then not only understand your capabilities, but share that information with the local community, the emergency response, the state, and then other departments and organizations. So that's great information. Now I'm going to jump over to you, Lieutenant Fitzhugh. What are your closing thoughts here for folks starting programs, have programs, disaster response?
I think the most important thing is you know, it's still new technology, like we said earlier, and it's just getting everybody involved to understand really the benefits of it. Like you said earlier, Sergeant Cody, was cost effective, et cetera. So I know that we was a little hesitant at first, but when he came, it opened up a whole new door for us, and then the funding started just flowing. And then grant writing, et cetera, is how we got more. But this can basically, you know, I mean, it can really change how, you know, you can go from just a natural disaster to now doing way more with it. Like we do, you know, like just pre-planted buildings now. We do training with it for just our regular firefighters, and it can go just a long ways. I think the most important thing is, you know, making sure everything's right, boxes checked, and then the SOG is very strict with safety involved in everything. That's virtually key. And then always communication, because you can always let your neighboring departments know that maybe not have the funding, so you can come in and help them. Or they might be doing something with drones or platforms that you might not be doing or thought of, and it's just really connecting, always connecting. That's really the key to this. Excellent.
Thank you very much for that, Brandon. Sergeant Cody, we'll have you kind of close out with final thoughts here.
Certainly work as a team first and develop your baseline concepts of what you're going to use the drone for, and determine what the drone's capabilities are to sustain that kind of operation. Then work locally with your other teams that are available around you, such as fire department or other sister agencies. And definitely keep in touch with the drone community, like the Darshan, and everybody here. Paul Rossi is a good civilian contact that I've learned to love and enjoy having him around. And we like to be communicating both with the other agencies and the public to keep everybody abreast of what we're doing. The more you have the public's support in these things, the better off you're going to be when you're trying to develop new technologies that you're going to put up in the air and put over somebody. So always make sure that you're practicing and working and expanding your network out there.
Thank you very much, Sergeant Cody. Thank you to all of the panelists for joining us today. Brandon Fitzhugh, can you share your contact information in the group chat? Kim Players was reaching out, wanted to know if you could share that information. If you don't, I can connect you on this off of this, but if you don't mind, you can toss that in there. But thank you to all the panelists for joining us, and thank you to everybody that tuned in and participated and is going to be able to take this information and go do more things with it. If you have any questions, reach out to the different folks. What I want to do right now is I just have to share this. Can you guys see this screen? the decision-making drone use webinar here. Anyone hear me? Did I just like cut out internet?
No, you're good. We see it.
Okay, so we got this screen right here. We've been on the law enforcement side 2 weeks ago, and we're doing disaster response today. Our next event is 2 weeks from today. It's integrating UAS and fire service. Andy Starnes with Insight Fire Training and Mike Chapman with FLIR Systems. Both guys out of North Carolina here are going to be on talking about the use of drones within the fire service. 2 weeks after that, on the 16th of September, we're going to be getting into UAS and hazmat operations. And then 2 weeks after that, on the 30th of September, we'll have some great panelists on here to discuss in a little bit more detail just building and managing that drone program. So thank you to all the panelists for joining. Thank you to FoxFury Lighting Solutions, Insight Fire Training, and FLIR Systems, and 910 Drones for getting this all together and pushing out the decision-making drone use webinar. Again, I just want to end this by saying thank you to the panelists. Really appreciate the time that you guys have taken and the information that you have shared. Our audience really appreciates it. So thank you very much.